Hey, Happy Families, that is the title of this video. Um, I've entitled it that way from sort of expectation I feel that there is, certainly to some extent in British society, and I imagine across the world, that there's this idea that families always need to get on with each other. I mean, internally speaking. Um, and I just want to challenge that concept a little bit. Um, Firstly, some people may think it's crass talking about this subject online, on an international forum to total strangers. But frankly, I think some of these things need to be discussed, or at least, highlighted, because it's just a fact of life. Um, and that is that this concept of happy families, that people should be obliged to get on with their family members or constantly be in touch with their family members, is not entirely realistic. Um, I think the thing about families is your families come in all shapes and sizes, and we're thrust into this world as part of a family. Usually, obviously, there's orphans and people who are adopted and so on, but there's all sorts of different setups. But generally speaking, we're all part of some sort of unit. Could be a very small unit, could be a big unit, whatever that is. And there's a social expectation, or you hear things like, oh, but that person's your father, that person's your brother, that person's your sister. And it's a sort of expectation that you need to get on with them. And I think most people would agree, for example, you get situations like sibling rivalries, especially as children. That's pretty normal, and it's generally not taken very seriously. It's seen as a very normal thing. Brothers and sisters argue, brothers and brothers, sisters and sisters. It's pretty normal. And it's very often, seen in almost a light-hearted manner. Um, but what bugs me, and that's partly why I'm making the video, sometimes you come across people who come from a very happy family insofar as they have very, very little animosity with family members, if any. Um, and it's almost like they're trying to rub it in. And I know they're not, but they come from this happy background, ostensibly, and then they sort of enforce their scenario onto other people, i.e., oh, but you need to talk to that person because that's your whoever, your father, your mother, your brother, your sister. And it's almost like they put expectations on you based on their their state of affairs. Um, and the thing is, I'm not malicious minded. If someone has a stable family, if they happen to be very close to the family members, all the best to them. That's wonderful. But they have to understand not all families are the same. And it does bug me when they kind of put their notion of a happy family onto others. It annoys me because number one, it's none of their business. Number two, it's not realistic because it's almost like they're living in a little bubble and they don't realize the reality of this world is probably most families, if we're being completely honest, have their skeletons, have their tensions. Um, I think there's very, very few families that can honestly say they're entirely smooth and can honestly say that relations are very good. Um, One reason I despise programs like the Jeremy Kyle show is because I think the likes of Kyle are parasites, basically. And, I don't want to make it too personal, but I think basically what he does and what his show does is completely, completely odious. It's kind of like, yes, it's taken, these are real situations, but in my opinion, it's exploiting those situations. And I know people go on voluntarily, but they're bribed basically. Um, and I've nothing but contempt for it. So that's the other extreme. There's the extreme of kind of happy families, and this expectation that everyone should be happy families. There's the other extreme of, family feuds becoming very public and very, and that's why I'm going to allude to my own situation, but I'm not going to kind of talk about anyone particular specifically because it's not my way and I don't think it's the right place to do that. Phone rings. I'm going to ignore that because I want to make this video. So basically, this is something that is quite apparent in a lot of families that there are internal tensions. Um, in recent months, I've had it's a lot more than a fallout with a close family member. It's a wilderness, and this is someone who's close to me by nature. And this person, I'm at a state, or I'm in a situation where I think there is no possibility of compromise. There is no possibility of the ceasefire insofar as avoiding confrontation, yes, but basically I haven't spoken to this person. This is someone who's close to me, and does it get me down a bit? But I've also taken the view I'm not going to let their attitude and their problem ruin my life. And I don't think I should be obliged just because it's social expectation to make peace. The thing is, we've made peace before, and it's always ended up flat. So I really don't see the point. It takes too much energy because we go through that, then it's back to square one with the attitude this person has. Um, and without going into all the details, I'm not entirely innocent. I've said cruel things, but this is someone who is confrontational for the sake of it, who actively seeks confrontation. Whereas I'll defend myself and I'm capable of, giving as good as I get, but I actively avoid confrontation because I just cannot stand the stress of it. And I've reflected on this situation and on this, we've never been particularly close, but this time I don't think there's any hope. And people will say, but that person is this relation to you. You should make peace or whatever. My only concern is the practicalities in the future, how it might affect other family members. And there's all sorts of things to consider. Things that are, I'm thinking long term here. In terms of that person having nothing to do with my life, that's great. I'm in a situation now where I've no choice but to be in close proximity to them. There's no other way because we live under the same house, and until I'm in a more stable situation, there's no other way. Um, but then there's things like Christmas, and this also ties into my point. There's social expectations about families need to get together at Christmas. And don't get me wrong, I'm no Ebenezer Scrooge. I enjoy Christmas. And in an ideal situation, it would be a perfect setting. But I'm not looking forward to this Christmas at all. A pet dog died a while back. I had him for 12 years. That was difficult because we all loved him, and he's gone now. And there's this situation, so it's just not a Christmas that I am looking forward to one little bit. There's other equivalents around the world, like Spring Festival in China. It's also worth pointing out that in certain cultures, family is particularly important. I think family is important all over the world, but in certain cultures it is particularly important. China, certainly, and I'd say Latin cultures, I'd say Italy. I mean, granted, I'm only going on stereotypes here. I may be wrong about this, but it's my speculation that family is considered very important in those situations, perhaps more than it would be, for example, in Northern Europe. Um, I think the British are quite independent-minded people, although it's very hard to tell what we are because on one hand we're very independent-minded, and most British families are not particularly close. On the other hand, there is definitely a close knit atmosphere with a lot of families. So it's hard to make conjecture on that. But what I'm basically saying here is that I resent this idea that just because society says so, we have to be close to family members. And I don't want to give the false impression here. I'm not like at war with my family. I get on well with most of my family. I mean, I've had big arguments with everyone in my family at some point, but this particular person, this situation is now, I see no way of going back. It does depress me, but not because we've fallen out, rather because of the implications of the future. I mean, I couldn't care less what they think of me, but I am somewhat concerned about the damage it could do to others. Because this is the thing, in a family, fallouts do affect other people, and that's something I'm trying very hard to avoid. So I'm trying to make as little an issue of this as possible. This person is not having that. They just want confrontation whenever they get the chance. Um, I also think the press has a lot to answer for when it comes to putting politicians on a pedestal. People always criticize politicians for not being sincere, and although that is a very fair criticism, I think sometimes politicians are under a pedestal to be like a Stepford family. Um, it's particularly noticeable in the States when you have presidential runs. It gets a bit, I don't know if American viewers feel this way, but for me, it's a bit nauseating, frankly, to always hear about, oh, a candidate's father was this, their mother was that, and it's all like happy families. I mean, it makes me wonder, well, none of these candidates have none of these candidates have arguments with the families? And if they had, would the media attack them for it? And if so, well, to me, that's hypocritical because every single journalist would be in a similar situation. So when I think politicians are under enormous pressure because they have to project this image of nice, happy family. And I mean, okay, I've just quoted the States. Here in Britain, if a politician has some family background where they're estranged from a certain family member, for example, I guarantee you the Daily Mail, which is a paper I have a lot of contempt for, would absolutely have some inside story about the background and why they fell out and the dark secret of this politician. And it's a lot of crap. It's a lot of trash, and it just kind of pisses me off. A, because it's none of their business. It doesn't affect voters unless it's directly affecting the judgment in their job. It's really none of our business. If a politician is estranged from his or her partner, their children, whatever. I mean, I can understand the argument if they're making policy that affects families, social policy that affects families, because then there could be a charge of hypocrisy. So I do understand in that regard. But otherwise, I really think it's none of our business. And the Daily Mail, the reason I mentioned the Mail specifically is because they tend to have these undercover stories about. And I've always admired or respected the French attitude, which is a politician's private life is private. That may be slowly changing. I know Francois Hollande has had a bit of a roller coaster with his private life. But unless I'm mistaken, traditionally the French attitude was keep private lives private, and that's something I very much respect. The French press, I think, is a lot less ruthless than the British press, but our tabloids really are ruthless, incredibly cruel. Um, I just don't think it's anyone's business but the people directly involved, unless it directly impacts policy, or unless it is involving criminal acts. If someone has abused your children or something like that, that's a different matter. If someone's in a leadership position and they've committed serious offences, that's obviously a different matter. And this country has been rocked by child abuse scandals involving the establishment. But I don't want to go off too much on a completely, on other issues. We'll go round this up pretty soon, but I think that we have to accept that the vast majority of families are not as squeaky clean and as shiny happy as is this notion of happy families. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, everyone is at war with the family. Certainly not. I think most families are somewhere in the middle. They have arguments periodically. They get on with their family. They do things together. They're civil. But I think the majority of people get on with their family because it is their family, and it's sort of an obligation. Um, I mean, don't get me wrong. I have respect for my family members, and of course, I care for them deeply. But I'm not going to live my entire life around convenience to please, for example, the person I mentioned or didn't mention. Let me know your thoughts. But I think we just have to be honest here. The majority of families are not that. You know, most people, if they're being honest, have internal squabbles in their family, and I think that's normal. I think there's this taboo around it, like when there's a heated argument, oh, that's abnormal. It's how terrible. It is stressful, but it's not actually unusual. It's very common. And I think by looking at it as quite a normal, common thing, makes it easier to deal with, actually. There was a point in the UK where the divorce rate was so high, it was no longer a case of, you know, all these poor children sort of driven apart by divorce. It's kind of the normal thing where children would say, oh, my parents are divorced. Yeah, yeah, normal family. Wasn't even a big deal at one point. Um, let me know your thoughts on this. And just just a disclaimer, because I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I care deeply for my family. Of course I do. I love them. I care deeply for them. But I don't have a perfect family, and most people don't. And my family, like any other, has internal issues. And as for this person, it's going to cause complications in the future because, and this might sound very crass to put in a video, but I have to think of long-term implications of, for example, my family members getting older, and then at some point having to communicate with that person. I know I'm talking in reels here, but I don't want to be too open because it's a privacy issue. But I think people can work out what I'm saying. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Is the whole happy families thing a bit of a charade? And I'm not being misery here. I'm not being sort of an Ebenezer Scrooge. I wish all the best to people who do have very happy family setups, but they have to accept that they can't put their conjecture onto others. Can't kind of tell others how to have their family lives just because theirs is really smooth. The majority of people, I think, don't have that. Okay, thanks for watching.